thank you so much for coming. It's lovely to see old and new faces. And it's an absolute pleasure to welcome EJ Milner-Gulland to give the DICE annual lecture. In terms of the overview of today, we're going to start off with me talking about the last year in DICE, then EJ will give her talk. There'll be time for questions, then we'll give student and staff prizes, and then we'll finish with a vote of thanks by Professor Heather Ferguson right at the end. So in terms of, for people who are new, who and what is DICE? So we're a research centre in the School of Anthropology and Conservation with about 30 academic staff, 14 members of the DICE Advisory Board. We've just come from a DICE Advisory Board meeting today, so it was fantastic to catch up with them. And then about 40 PhD students, 40 master students, and 180 undergraduate students. Here are all the DICE staff members, and the ones with the yellow frames are the ones who joined us in the last year. So it's fantastic that, that Peter, Dave, Helen, and Mahesh have joined us in the last year. Do that. And also, as I said, we have an advisory board of some leading conservation scientists and practitioners from government, NGO sector, and the private sector who advise us on what we do. In terms of our research, well, we work all around the world. So we've got projects on almost every continent, doing a range of activities, both species, landscape focus, but always with a focus on people-centered conservation and a focus on impact. And in the last year, we've had several big research grants, in particular from the Darwin Initiative. So work for Joe Bull in Uzbekistan, and for Jim Groombridge with his fantastic endangered bird conservation, and then also funding for from WWF for work in Guyana. So we're very grateful to those donors for that. In terms of awards, it's been a really nice year. So Professor Zoe Davies won the British Ecological Society Award for her work, especially supporting the BES with everything that they do. And just in the last month, Rebecca Turner won a prize at the BES Climate Science for Ecological Forecasting Symposium. Another really nice project, one led by Chester Zoo, but has involved people from DICE for many years now, was awarded a BIAZA Silver winner. So BIAZA is the British and Irish Association of Zoos and Aquariums, for their in situ work on the critically endangered Bermuda skink. So there's Helena Turner, who did her PhD on that, not measuring a skink, measuring something, I'm not sure what that is, but there is a skink there. So these are smallish lizards that are critically endangered, and with a mixture of captive breeding and field work, has really turned them around from being in a lot of trouble to now being a conservation success story. Marvelously, in the last couple of days, this ENDS report came up with their power list, the first time they've done a power list. And Julia Baker, who's one of our alumni, and Sofasu Amgasan, who's one of our PhD students, who we're all pointing at over there, are on this list of the 100 most powerful people working in the environment sector in the UK. So that's, an incredible recognition. And the more you praise Sophos for it, the more embarrassed he looks. So please keep on doing that. In terms of our publications, Rob Fish produced this beautiful book coming out of the work that he's been doing on valuing nature. And we also had a whole set of publications, including in high impact journals like Nature, Trends in Ecology and Evolution, and other Nature family papers. And also, just as importantly, we've done a good job of explaining this work to the wider world. So we've had, everything from, in the last week, the work of Jim Groombridge and his team looking at pink pigeons in Mauritius, to the really lovely work done by a set of people in DICE looking at computer games and how they influence people's views and attitudes towards conservation. the other big news, so every 7 years, the UK government goes through an assessment process of the research excellence of each department and unit in each university. And the results came out 2 weeks ago, and DICE and our colleagues in geography came 14th in the UK in geography and environmental studies. Now, in the last week, 10 days, every university has spent all of its time spinning that data as much as possible. And it's a sort of, you look in admiration about how some people are able to spin not much. But we have something that's very easy to say, which is this score is based on 3 components, and one of them is quality of research, in terms of everyone in DICE had to submit some articles that were read by experts, and their quality was assessed, and we came first in the country for the quality of our research. So yeah, so we were extremely pleased and proud of that, and a real testament to a whole set of people supporting the process. It also means we should hopefully get more money, so that's another great thing. Outreach and engagement. Jake Bicknell did a great TEDx talk earlier in the year, and our social media accounts continue to flourish. We now have an active Instagram account, so if you're not following us on Instagram, please do. We're doing a DICE takeover every couple of weeks, where either a DICE staff, student, or alumnus does 3 posts explaining what they do, what they love about conservation, and what research they did while they were here. So I can thank the people in the room who already done the takeover, and look forward to many more. If anyone's in DICE and hasn't done one of these, I will be talking to you soon, because yeah, it's again another really nice way of sharing with the wider world the work we do. Another big thing in terms of outreach and engagement was that last year we had the first University of Kent BioBlitz. So this was led by the Sustainability Working Group, and was a fantastic day. So a BioBlitz is where you spend 1 day in a particular location trying to record as many species as you can. And it's really nice for producing data, but also a great way of engaging with people, especially people from the city of Canterbury and other local people, in the sorts of ways that you can measure biodiversity, and looking at a whole range of important species that we've got. So there were bat surveys and butterfly surveys and bird surveys and hedgehog monitoring and all sorts of other cool stuff. And that was, a fantastic day. Because of COVID, that was, for a lot of us, the first time we'd actually met up in person. So it was, an absolutely fantastic event. And recorded all these different species across campus. And another key thing is, that was the first of hopefully many. So the next BioBlitz is on Saturday, 11th of June. Again, we'll be running all these great events. And if you'd like to come, please book through Eventbrite. So there's the link there to the page on the DICE website about the BioBlitz. From there, there's an Eventbrite link that you can follow and sign up to all those good things. And another great bit of outreach and engagement. And once this event is over, I will start planning for it. So that's why I haven't mentioned it yet, but we will be doing this again. But last year, we had the DICE 2021 Twitter conference, which again came from student ideas from the year before. And it's a way of our students, staff, and alumni tweeting about the work that they do. So yes, we had 42 presentations, and roughly 750,000 people saw those tweets. So it's a brilliant way of sharing information about the sort of work that we do. Our alumni, we're always very proud of our alumni. The map with the number of where our alumni come from, I've been able to shade in some more countries recently. So we've welcomed people from the Philippines, Myanmar, and Uzbekistan for the first time. So we now have people, current students and alumni from 106 countries around the world, and they continue to win really important awards and accolades. And this is a presentation that we put together a few years ago just to illustrate the range of ways that our alumni work in conservation. And one of the really nice things in terms of one of our alumni this year was that the first woman to be head of the Magic Circle is a DICE alum. And so, yeah, we were delighted to hear about that. And as you can see from this BBC article, her favoured style is environmental magic, where she uses her skills to tell people about environmental issues. So, yeah, that's a really nice example of what our alums come on to do. We will expect you to follow on in the Magic Circle role for years to come. So I hope you're all practicing your magic. In a more mainstream way, we're also incredibly proud that Dr. Winnie Kiru was awarded the Order of the Grand Warrior, which is the sort of national award by the Kenyan government in recognition of her amazing work for elephant conservation. Yeah. Yeah, so for elephant conservation, for reforestation projects, and yeah, just being an incredible conservation leader in Africa. And also, we're very proud at the Tusk Conservation Awards. So Tusk is an important conservation NGO that focuses on conservation in Africa. Rachel Ikeme was runner-up in the Conservation in Africa Award, and Simpson Uri Cobb, who's the CEO of Save the Rhino Trust in Namibia, won the Prince William Award for Conservation in Africa. And so it was, yes, I think the first time I went to London post-COVID was to be there that evening to see them receiving their award. So again, fantastic work by them. So that's the overview. And now we're on to the talk by Professor EJ Milner-Gulland. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce EJ, who is the Tasso Leventis Professor of Biodiversity at the University of Oxford. EJ is an incredibly accomplished conservation scientist, having published 400 articles and books with pioneering work on the harvesting of wild species and wildlife trade, planning for effective and socially just conservation, and understanding how ecological, social, and behavioral factors interact and affect conservation. But to me, what makes EJ particularly inspiring is how hard she works and how effective she is at translating her research into action. This includes co-founding and chairing the Saiga Conservation Alliance and co-founding the Conservation Optimism movement in 2016. She also provides advice as chair of the UK government's Darwin Expert Committee, as a trustee of WWF UK and an advisor to the UK Treasury. She's also been an amazing mentor, supporter and champion of people, working to make the conservation community more representative and inclusive. Lots of past and current DICE members have valued and benefited from that support over many years. So it's an absolute pleasure to welcome her today. EJ, thank you very much.
It's a great honour to be here. Thank you so much. I've always loved my time coming to DICE. I think it's such a pioneering department that's always been at the forefront of conservation right from the time it started. So it's a great honour to be asked to come and present to such a wonderful organisation. And what Bob just said in terms of all the things that people have gone off to do is just a real testament to how brilliant you are. So I'm going to talk today about how to find optimism in a time of biodiversity crisis. We all need a bit of that. So as Bob said, I've trained a lot of people. I've been a professor for quite a few decades, and you know, probably 300 or 400 people have gone through my lab, and they go out into the wide world and they do their conservation. And I kind of like to keep in touch and see how they're doing. And sometimes it can be quite stressful to think about how difficult they're finding things out there in the real world when they're trying to battle against the rising tide of environmental destruction. I'm just going to give you one example of that, and that's from Saimar Protection Forest, as was in Cambodia, in Southeast Cambodia. And this is a forest where I and my group have worked for a few years, and about 10 people have been employed there who've been at my group. So here's us enjoying a beer on top of a hill at Saimar. Now it's a beautiful place. It's a really special part of the biodiversity of that part of Asia. So up until 2006, probably, it had tigers in it, but it's also really kind of globally significant centre for ungulate conservation, for ungulate diversity, things like gaur and banteng you can see there. It's got the world's largest population of Duklangers. It's got 21 species of woodpecker. Isn't that cool? 16 species new to science have been found there. It's got a relatively healthy population of elephants. It's quite special. But of course, it's also subject to threats. So here's some photos that I and my team took on a trip there a few years ago. And those threats are interesting because they range from the very local to the very global. So there's bushmeat that's sold relatively locally, but also taken over the border into Vietnam. There's small scale clearance for agriculture. And there's also tropical hardwoods. So you can see some rosewood there. Some guys taking it out of the forest. They hugely impressed me, these guys. Most of them are on methamphetamine. It's in the middle of the night. They're going up and down these kind of cavernous, chasms to get to the forest, to get to these trees that are quite scattered through the forest. Last time I went, I picked up a plank that they'd sawn, and in the dark, high on crack, it was a beautiful plank. It's a beautiful plank. I've got it in my office. I shouldn't have, but quite an impressive bit of international wildlife trade there. And this office is full of chainsaws and snares and things, and it's kind of going right up the walls. So you can't actually get into the office anymore. It's just kind of growing and growing. So massive threats to this place. It's also a very dangerous place to be. So, for example, 3 rangers from WCS were killed in 2018 just patrolling inside the park. It's also subject to quite substantial pressures of deforestation. So you can see the green area, including the green shaded out area, is the area. So the dark green is the core zone, and then the buffer zone, and then the pink. This is 2011. The pink is where deforestation has happened. That is the park headquarters. So right on the deforestation frontier. This you can see is quite interesting. So this is inside the buffer zone. You can see the kind of squares. That's economic land concessions, where the land has been granted to people to clear and then plant cash crops. There's a nature reserve just on the way to the park headquarters, in which which is basically just not a nature reserve anymore. And you're sitting in a small town, and there's a sign in the middle of the town that says "Welcome to the nature reserve." So it's under a lot of stress. However, we all have to think about counterfactuals, don't we? So this is what's happened between 2010 and 2019. It's a RED demonstration project, so a project for kind of carbon capture. The orange is where the trend in deforestation would have been in the absence of any conservation, and this red is where the deforestation has actually been in that period. And so although you might say, well, there's been quite a lot of deforestation on the forest frontier, there could have been a hell of a lot more. And that is because the conservationists are there. That's because including people who've come through my lab are still there. So think how depressing it is to be there and to be battling the whole time against these really difficult threats. And yet, it is sort of inspiring as well that it's still there at all. So I think this is actually a strange story of optimism. It's the kind of thing that conservationists out in the real world have to deal with all the time, this kind of story of optimism. So that's one. I can tell you another story of optimism now, which is about my favorite species, which is the saiga. And this is one that's kind of been quite recently started with me, this particular story. I'm going to start by giving you just a little bit of background of the saiga, which is, of course, the best species in the world. So it's a plains-dwelling species. The males have horns, as you can see. It's very cute. It lives in kind of large herds and migrates around. It's found in Russia and Central Asia. So we've got a small population in Mongolia of a different subspecies, got 3 main populations in Kazakhstan, a couple of which are transboundary. So the Ustyurt one is transboundary with Uzbekistan, the Ural with Russia, and then there's another population in Russia. So the story I'm mostly going to tell you about today is about the Ustyurt population. So saigas live in a continental climate that's pretty harsh. So, in the summer, it's very hot, it's very dry. In the winter, it's very cold, not very snowy, but there's some snow. It's a very difficult environment to live in. It's an environment where saigas are beautifully adapted. And it's also an environment where tigers have been living, coexisting with humans for millennia. So, for example, this is the area the austere area is scattered with these hunting traps, some of which are really ancient and going right up to the kind of Middle Ages. So this is an arrow-shaped trap. You can see there's a hole in the top into which you would drive the herds of tigers, and then they would kill them for meats and hides once they're in. And I like this other one because you can see the picture of the car. That shows how big it is. It's a massive trap, and you can really only, people are starting to use LiDAR and aerial photography to start to find them and finding them everywhere. So, people have been involved with tigers forever. They also have cultural values. So the thing with velvet is a talisman that was found in the home of someone in Uzbekistan. And those horns, I took a picture in Hong Kong. So these are tiger horns that are used in Chinese traditional medicine. Tigers had a long history, though, of exploitation, and particularly in the Russian Empire, of overexploitation. So here's some quotes that kind of highlight that overexploitation. It's sort of like, the Russian Empire out of St. Petersburg saw the Central Asian steppes as their kind of exotic place where they could go and, conquer and harvest the natural resources, just as we in this country saw Africa as that kind of place. So you can see here many, many tigers, a loss of trade, and then tigers being nearly on the verge of extinction by, the time of the Soviet Union. And actually the Soviet Union, of all the things it did at least stop this trade of tiger, close the borders. And over the next few decades, the tiger population increased a lot. Here's some beautiful pictures of increased tigers. So that by the kind of end of the Soviet Union in 1990 or so, there was kind of between 1 and 2 million animals probably on the steppes of Central Asia. Then the Soviet collapse happened, and there was a kind of 3 evils of that collapse. So there was the opening of the border with China, massive trade. There was rural depopulation and the rural economy just collapsing. And so this is a picture of a village just degraded, and a collapse of funding for conservation and management. Not surprising, there was a lot of poaching. So here's some pictures from someone's photo album that they showed us in the steppes. And that poaching was just to keep going, but also in order to sell to illegally through across into China, leading to massive decline. So this is the Kazakh population. You can see it relatively stable. You can see the period in which there was no census because the Soviet Union had collapsed and there was no management. And then the census is restarted. And over the next 5 years, the population halved each year, which is the fastest recorded decline, I think, for a mammal. Okay, so far so sad. But, actually, it's a real success story of people coming together. And I was a real skeptic about the power of UN conventions until 2006, when the UN Convention on Migratory Species had the Tiger MOU, which started up, and it actually brought together all the range state governments. China is involved as an observer. All the NGOs who work in this area on tigers, we all came together. We've got an action plan. It's been going since 2006, and actually it's working. We've got people doing protected area monitoring, people doing community engagement. We've got people doing alternative livelihoods, working with local people to keep their crafts alive. So these women were very keen to keep their local traditional crafts alive, and also by teaching younger people how to do this embroidery and then also selling them. And the government started putting much more money across the range into anti-poaching conservation. And you can see here, these are the 3 populations, the 3 main populations in the Kazakhstan area who have the best monitoring. You can see the Betpak-Dala population in particular just shot up, incredibly fast rate of increase for this species. The Ural one, which is in the west, closer to Russia, also increasing. Interestingly, the Usturt one, the one in the middle, has not increased. It used to be the biggest population. It had about 250,000 animals in it just before the breakup of the Soviet Union. If you're interested to know about the massive drop in the Bekpak population, that was 2015 when 200,000 animals died in a matter of 2 weeks from a bacterial infection. But that's not this story. That's another story. I'll tell you that another time in the pub, maybe. Let's go back to Stuart. So this is some satellite tracked animals that were tracked by these guys. And you can see here, this is springtime and they're kind of hanging around in Kazakhstan. Uzbekistan's just across the border. Now, one of the issues here is that in 2012, that orange line that was the border, it was a free border and a fence was put up. I've got a picture of the fence. Here's the fence. Was put up as part of a customs union between Russia, Kazakhstan and Belarus, just, anti-drug smuggling, whatever. And that did rather stymie their attempts to migrate backwards and forwards. So if you can look, you can actually see traces of them walking along the line of the fence. And another thing there is the red line is a bit of infrastructure. So Plan New Railway now being built. And so there's all sorts of things that are starting to break up the range. Climate change is also likely affecting them. It's likely pushing them further to the north, so not coming into Uzbekistan so much. Poaching has continued, and particularly in Uzbekistan, there's been continuing poaching, but also in Kazakhstan in this area. Okay, so that's where the saigars are. Now I'm going to switch and do another bit of the story, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about this area and about how, a bit of the culture, a bit of the tradition, because I think we need to understand that in order to be able to understand where we're going and why this is optimistic. So it's a beautiful, beautiful area. And you could see actually in the map that I showed that the saigars of this area are quite kind of alongside the Aral Sea. So the Aral Sea is to the kind of right-hand side of this population. And the Aral Sea is maybe not as well known as it should be in the West, but I think it really should be, because it's a massive cautionary tale of environmental destruction and of, the folly of mankind, really. So here's the Aral Sea. This is an old picture. It's fourth largest inland sea in the world, as was, and it's had a place in culture and history of humanity for millennia. So this is, Alexander had a capital city here. It's a place that was renowned as a kind of oasis of plenty in the desert, all the way back into these times. It's also quite a dynamic environment. So the reason why Alexander's capital is no more is that the rivers shifted, and so the deltas moved to another place, leaving it kind of in the desert. But by the time of the Soviet Union, there was a delta. It was very rich. It was one of the biggest fishing ports in the Soviet Union. It supplied a lot of the fish to the rest of the Soviet Union and to Eastern Europe. And it was a beautiful place, as you can see by these wonderful paintings that are in the local art gallery. Here's its important port. It was important for the Navy, as I said, important for fishing, but it was also massively important for cotton, which was the problem. So these big rivers were kind of diverted to provide irrigation to massive cotton fields, which were, a huge part of the economy of Uzbekistan. And cotton is not only very thirsty for water, it also needs a lot of pesticides, and so, it can poison the water courses and the soil, as well as just sucking up water. And so here's some aerial photos of the sea, and this is, the horrible disaster that is the Aral Sea. And you can see here, pretty much dried up. And that sand, that kind of sea bottom is toxic. It's got the pesticides, it's got salt, which blows all over the region and causes cancers and other mortalities in humans, and causes a lot of environmental damage. Here's some pictures of the sea bottom. That's a picture of the dam that they put between the north and the south to try to retain the very top end of the sea as something that's vaguely a functional ecosystem. This is a recent picture from Google Maps, and just going to pick out a few things. So That is Munak, which was the big port at the bottom of the Aral Sea. This is where the Navy was based. This is where, you know, the big fishing industry was based. You can see now it's in a patch of kind of greenery, but it's away from anything sea-like. This is the area where the Saigars were. So that's the border that I showed you in the satellite colouring data. It's actually it's called the Saigachi Reserve. So with hope. Well, and this is an interesting place. So this is called Resurrection Island. So this is an island that's right in the middle of the sea. It was kind of isolated for at least 400 years in the sea, and this is the focus of the next part of the story. So you've all seen probably pictures from Chernobyl of kind of abandoned Soviet architecture. Resurrection Island is sort of a similar story. So this was made into a closed area. It was a military facility for testing biological weapons during the Soviet times, and so people weren't allowed on it. This is the kind of military town where people who were scientists who were working in this thing could live. Some rare archive footage. This is how it was. I'm not going to say now because I know there's been a lot more looting. There's been a lot more kind of destruction of these areas. But this was taken in 2012, 2015 time, and you can see it's kind of fairly similar to the Chernobyl vibe. Okay, so where's the optimism here? You might ask. So in 2012, the SCA, that was when the Resurrection Island opened up, and people were allowed to go on it again. And you were able to get to it again because the Aral Sea had dried up, and there was a causeway you can drive to. So the SCA team from Uzbekistan went to Resurrection Island to see what was there, and they found some interesting stuff. It's actually a really interesting thing botanically and in faunal terms because it's been isolated from all sorts of exploitation, apart from the military people who didn't do much. For 400 years. So it's got really interesting ungrazed flora. It's got interesting fauna. It had a wolf pack. It had, you know, good steppe birds and so on, like lots of reptiles, that kind of thing. So really rich faunistically and flora. It also had saigars. It had a population of saigars, which had probably been on that island for a long time. And the reason why they were still there and they hadn't been poached was that they could, even when it opened up, they could get out onto the mud of the seabed. And here's some saigar footprints out on the seabed. You wouldn't want to drive after them to try to catch them because you'd sink. So it's this kind of salt encrusted soggy mud that is the seabed that they're able to kind of have a sanctuary. So there were still saigars there. Here's some saigars from January 2020 from the area. And you can see, you know, there's a relatively, it's not exactly huge, but there's some of them there, aren't there? So there is some hope. This is now switching to the next thing, which is a trip I made in 2018. And here's us all having lots of fun. And this is us in Nukus, the main city, before we set off. And it was to kind of try to take some of our donors out to have a look at the area, but also to try to see, you know, what the potential is and just to get a feel for what could be done for conservation in this area, which actually seemed suddenly rather deserving and rather kind of short-lived opportunity to kind of secure this area of kind of biodiversity that had sort of made it through somehow. So I'm going to say that these are road trip photos. They are taken out of a van window, but I'm actually not a very good photographer anyway. So, you know, this is trying to give you the vibe of a road trip, not just out of focus photos from my phone. So, you know, this area, this is kind of going up from Nukus up towards Munak and towards the Aral Sea area. And just thinking, oh, wow, actually, this area that is a synonym for destruction, degradation. In fact, if you look in the Lonely Planet guide, you can see if you like disaster tourism, then come here. You know, if you like to see what it looks like when the planet's been destroyed, come here. It's not true. You know, this is some really wonderful kind of ancient architecture and archaeology. There's layer upon layer upon layer of different cultures on top of each other. It's fascinating stuff, all the way back from prehistory through to the kind of the Romans and then through into the Islamic period and onwards. So these are kind of really ancient things. This is the end of the river, so not very far out of Nukus. So 200 kilometers from the sea. This is where the river ends that used to flow into the sea. So not so happy picture. This is Munak, that used to be the huge port and is now a kind of sleepy village. But this is one of the schools. This is a school in Nukus, and this is Saiga Day. So this is where we're starting to get a bit more optimistic. So this is children who are dancing a Saiga song and really thinking about their natural heritage and how they want to preserve it. That was cool. There's some really bright young things there who are really keen to make a difference, who want to be involved in conservation, but just at the moment don't really see a way to get into the International Network for Conservation. There's also industry. It's quite rich in oil and gas. So this is an oil plant, so it's out by one of the villages where a lot of the poachers live. But these people are kind of relatively keen to be involved in conservation and in trying to make social improvements as well. Munak's quite an interesting town because it has got potential for tourism, disaster tourism. It's got this ship's graveyard, which is rather splendid. That's the seabed. I'm standing, on top of the escarpment that used to be the edge of the sea, looking down onto the seabed. And if you look far and far away, there's the kind of canal that has a few bits of water in it still. But you also are starting to see regeneration. I wouldn't say regeneration because this is the sea bottom, but this is new. This is a new environment. It's not the same environment, but it's a new environment and it has got nature in it. So there was a lot of planting of tamarisk, and you can see to stabilize the sands, to stop the pesticide laced sands from flying all over the place. But you can see the tamarisk, but you can also see other stuff. There's some little lakes. There was a lot of bird song there. It was quite pleasant. And in fact, what would have been the Aral Sea bed is now called the Aral Kum, or the Aral Desert. So it's actually got a name as a kind of ecosystem. So if you're thinking about, all right, maybe there is a future, it's not going to be the past, but it is going to be a future, and it's not a hopeless future. It's a future that does include nature. And it includes people. So here's the kids at one of the schools in Munak who were I came along, they were really keen to talk to me, they were really keen to be involved and to get to know, their local wildlife. I was rather touched. None of them had seen a saiga. Oh, one of them had seen a saiga, I think, that their father had brought home dead, but none of them had seen an actual living saiga. But they drew these lovely pictures of saigas. I was really particularly touching, and it really speaks to what is the limited resource there. Almost all of the drawings they made had water in them. Saigas hate, saigas don't hate water. You did, interesting to see saigas in the water as what they imagined as this is beautiful nature. So how do we take all of this? How do we take this past, and how do we take this potential and move it into a future, and a future that's, going to work for people and for wildlife? And, when we speak about restoration or nature recovery, what are we meaning? We're meaning something that is a different future, but a good future. And that needs to be a future where poaching is not acceptable, where poaching is not carried out. But in order for that to work, it also needs to be a future in which people can make a living, and they can make a living with and from nature in a sustainable way. So, homestays, this is the hotel we stayed in Nukus, or, local crafts that go to be sold to tourists in Tashkent or somewhere like that. It needs to involve industry. So this is the head of effectively the head of corporate social responsibility for the gas plant, and they already support kids' education. They already support the Saiga Day events. Is there a way that they can support things further? So then perhaps there is a future for Saigas, and a future in which they flourish in this area and are part of a broader kind of sustainable economy. Well, I think the future is going to be brighter now, because of Joe, there you are, Andrew Shazoda, who's sitting here, who won a Darwin Initiative project last year to make this future happen. So, so just to give an idea, so the kind of orange and blue is the Saigachi Reserve, and the area of the operation of the Darwin Initiative project is the kind of yellow of the Resurrection Island and the dry Aral Sea bed, and then the green of areas where you could potentially, where's the kind of delta area where you could potentially have, alternative livelihoods, more of a kind of tourism economy. And, I think it's a very inspiring vision, and it's one that can also lead to transboundary conservation, because the animals can come back in from Kazakhstan, where there's plenty of them, across the Aral Sea bed and start to kind of join up with the ones that are already in Uzbekistan and turn it into something a bit more of a living landscape. So very exciting, that. And I should also say that our work has been supported over many years here by the People's Trust for Endangered Species, by the Whitley Fund for Nature, by the Wildlife Conservation Network, and by others. So it's been a long process, but I think it's transformational, this Darwin project that Joe's got. So I would say, here we are. I like the fact that Resurrection Island is called Resurrection Island, because I think if we think of resurrection in a different way, in a bit more an imaginative way, then it is about resurrection. Okay, so that couple of happy stories. Not all our stories can be happy. Let's remember that. Let's not get too carried away with all of this optimism. So I quite like this tweet. Just listen. I don't know how many of you know what this is. It's the Baiji, only to be found on the internet. So it's a river dolphin, Ganges river dolphin, now extinct, but still living in an MP3 file. I'm not pretending that's optimistic in any way, by the way. So how do we react to that? Okay, to that kind of, the level of threat that we are actually facing. And one way to do that is to go around shaking the tree and warning humanity and saying, naughty humanity, you should not be doing this as scientists. And you can get quite a lot of traction here. Just look at that out metric. Anyone in this room who's a academic would love that. So that's a measure of how much it's been taken up in social media, basically. So we could go around warning humanity about we've got to change our ways. And those warnings are working. So I think people are waking up. Governments are waking up. So the World Economic Forum 2022 assessment of global risks put biodiversity loss third. And it's been consistently high up in the wonderful league table of things that are going to destroy humanity. It's been consistently there for a few years now. And there's been more understanding now of the interrelatedness of things. And so that more understanding by our leaders that biodiversity loss actually underpins a lot of other bad things. So you probably can't read this, you maybe go and look later, but on the bottom are all the global risks. And then you can see the extent to which biodiversity loss and climate change and other things underpin and precipitate those other risks. So that's good that they're recognizing that. Industry is more and more kind of taking up the baton, and they're starting to think about, okay, how can we actually think through and change our behaviors in more sustainable ways? This is an example. It's everywhere. So if you look at the top 4 global challenges that UNESCO have identified, climate change, biodiversity is there first. Then if you actually look at what people are concerned about in the world, this is the world, not just here, the proportion of respondents who think that biodiversity loss is a global concern, high. People who are searching on social media on biodiversity and nature loss also going up. So eco-awakening is quite a good term for that. And that's leading to anger, it's leading to protests, it's leading to people, trying to get our leaders to change the way that they act, which is great and important. And I think it's starting to have a difference. So, in 1992, when we had the first Rio summit, we had a young girl who came and addressed the Rio summit. That summit's Greta Thunberg. She made an impassioned plea. People cried. She was forgotten. I don't think that's happening to Greta Thunberg in the same way. So now we're actually getting people mobilizing. But, and here's my but, I think negative messaging is important. We need to understand, but I don't think just standing around, just warning humanity and just scaring people works. In fact, the reason why I don't think that is because there's evidence to show that. So you can't maintain anger for a long time. You can't, people just get blunted to these kinds of issues or else they just switch off. So if we want to change behavior, and that's systemic as well as individual, we can't just use negative messaging. It doesn't work. So what we actually need is that everybody in society, and that includes not just the left-wing people, I'm sure, you know, who many environmentalists are, but also the Telegraph readers, also the readers of the Daily Mail. Everybody has to feel like they are a conservationist, and regardless of their professions. So I've put some professions up. These are just members of my family whose arm has been twisted. Okay, you know, it's not a representative sample of the population, but nonetheless, you see my point. People need a sense of agency. They need a sense of community. They need to be able to feel like they can do something together. So this is something that I set up during the first COVID lockdown, because feeling kind of stressed and hoping that this might be helpful to enable people to feel like they could work together to change their lifestyle, but also to influence people around them, and also to make their voices heard in civil society, to have the systemic change that we need. So we need to have this kind of thing, I think. It's not just the public though, and it's not just decision makers, it's also us. So bringing us back to the SIMAR thing and the fact that I'm training conservationists to go out and do a hard job in the world. A student of mine, Tom Pinkowski, led on a study about what conservationists need professionally in order to be able to keep going, to do the job that is actually going to help us to save nature. So this is that survey and the kind of levels of psychological distress. So psychological distress is kind of a good predictor of mental illness, and particularly severe distress. So we had, you know, substantial numbers of conservationists reporting distress that is of concern. This is just a summary of a model, an aggression model, in which, you know, the distance along the more to less distressed continuum represents the coefficients in the model and the strength of the relationship. See, interesting things there. Some of it's kind of obvious, but some of it is kind of helpful and might help us to think about how we treat people in conservation. So optimism is quite important, optimistic dispositions, but also respect, prestige, feeling that you contribute to conservation, and then things on the other side are demanding jobs and feeling unsafe in your job and things like that. Here's we had an open box at the end for comments, and here's some sort of negative comments about how people are feeling that it's difficult to work in conservation. It feels like most of the human race is rowing in a different direction. We will lose everything, and our children will have a very tough life if we fail to address the biodiversity crisis. The feeling of being hopeless at achieving goals and making the impact you crave always feels like we should do more. It feels like a drop in the ocean. I'm sure all of you who work in conservation can really resonate with those kinds of quotes. Here's some more positive ones on the other side. Successful conservation spurs one on to work better and harder. Balanced against this is the knowledge that those of us working in conservation are doing something worthwhile with our lives. So the sense of community, the sense of doing something worthwhile is really important as well. So this brings me to conservation optimism. And it was born in March 2026. I'd just come back from SIMAR, actually from the forest that I was telling you about at the beginning. And I went to the student conference on conservation science in Cambridge, which in itself is a wonderful, optimistic, and enthusing thing to do. And Nancy Knowlton was giving the keynote about ocean optimism. And she's a very inspiring person. She set up some social media with some colleagues, just because everything she saw in the media or on social media about the oceans was negative. And she wanted to have some success stories in there because they do exist. So she'd set that up, she said, and I thought, okay, that's cool. I've just got a new job. They gave me some money. What shall I do? I'll follow Nancy. And on Earth Day 2017, I used some of that money to have a conservation optimism summit. which was just amazing. It was just a wonderful few days. We broke every convention in the kind of conference mold. We had a not a poster session instead of a poster session and everything like that. It was great. And I thought, okay, well, that's nice. Done that. Let's go. But the young people around me, and actually the people who came were mostly quite unconventional. Young people, small NGOs, people from business, people from all sorts of places. They wouldn't let it drop. And so I kept it going, and we had a website. And then, you know, that thing has grown and grown and grown. And what started as a very small thing has become really big. We've got more than 200 organizations, including academic organizations, including businesses, including lots of small NGOs and big ones, all around the world have joined our network, which is just a network of people who are feeling the same way and who pledge to not only give the negative messaging, but always give some hope, always give something to take people away from the negative towards, yes, there's something that can be done. Not shying away from the negative, facing the negative, recognizing where we are and thinking about how to move forward so that nobody is left from your messaging feeling there is no hope. So that resonated, and this is a great network. There's only me and our director, who's actually an employee of Oxford University, Julia Minya, who's amazing. Everybody else is a volunteer from all over the world. It's just amazing. And we've got 3 hubs now with their own logos. I think there's a little bit of, well, we tried to avoid the plant blindness by having a little plant there, but I might say, where are the fungi? But, you know, moving on. They do Instagram, they do Twitter, they do Facebook, they do lots and lots of outreach in person as well. And so I find actually what's most inspiring for me about conservation optimism is all these people who have come together to kind of try to make a difference. And so I'm just going to end with a few quotes from the first summit that I think really say it all to me. We just asked them to write why they were conservation optimists. Perseverance is the key, and I believe we are here to win the battle. The world needs me to believe, and because I need to believe. Without optimism, there would be no conservation. Everybody's contributing to the movement. We can truly make the world a better place. Humans don't want to live alone. I have seen evidence we can make a difference. And I like this one. Trees make me smile. Thank you.